Oh, there he is. I was saying, I know Fabrice is here. I saw him. So, well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Kettering Foundation. I'm just so excited to be here, to be able to be part of what we're doing today. It feels so good to be in the Ponent Center, and I'm thinking about the fact that David Ponent's hired me. Here we are in the center, and we're doing the great work, right, that he was so devoted to, and of course our community so needs. So thank you all for being here. My work with the League, I do a little Dayton Access TV show. Maybe you've seen my YouTube, like little segments, whatever. But one of the things I say all the time is that democracy is not a spectator sport. And, you know, my wife is totally into football, and she loves it. She's going to be at the Cleveland Browns game this Sunday. It's wonderful. That's a spectator sport for her. She can watch and enjoy it and talk about it and complain about it. But you know what? Democracy isn't like that. We need to practice, and then we need to perform. We need to be active in democracy. And Sharon, you identified those elements. I think the rest of the day we're going to see more of that. And so what I am going to do is invite our panelists to then share sort of their stories, but also what they see that's actively happening in our community that can help to advance this wonderful democracy. And what we planned, rather than me introduce folks, is to allow people to introduce themselves and their story. So I've got a number of questions. The first one is, please introduce yourself, share your story about how you got involved in democracy work, or if you could think of it as how democracy connects to your daily life. And Peter, I'm gonna start with you and move this way, and then I'll adjust it as we go.
My name is Peter Benkendorf. I'm the founder of The Collaboratory. It's a nonprofit organization I started in 1992 in Chicago. I've been in Dayton since January 1st, 2009. The Collaboratory is a catalyst for community and social change. We like to say we move innovative ideas to transformative action. Our primary focus area is on centering well-being as the new definition and metric of community success. Too often, we judge community success based on some transactional external economic measures by how many jobs we've brought to the region, which is certainly a good thing, or what the average household income is, which is also certainly a good thing. But that doesn't really tell us how our community is doing, how individuals are doing. And so we've been working with the Gallup organization that's done a lot of work over the last 15 years to demonstrate that there's a strong correlation between well-being and community outcomes. Without well-being, we can't have democracy, and without democracy, we can't have well-being. So these things really work hand in hand together. Certainly financial well-being is important, but also physical well-being, social well-being, sense of community, and sense of purpose. So we must be thinking much more holistically, and we must be closing the gaps that we see in our community. Much of it was demonstrated in the 2018 Frontline ProPublica documentary, Left Behind America, and that was really a big part of the motivation for why we got this initiative moving. How I got into this work, I mean, there's probably two pieces of this. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and so that certainly informed a lot of my work. They were fortunate enough to get to England in the very late 30s and came to the United States in 1950, but their values and their global perspective of what they went through certainly informed a lot of what's of important and of interest to me. I spent 5 years in the sporting goods industry in Chicago and found that work somewhat unfulfilling compared to what I'm doing now. I really looked around at what I saw, and particularly the disparity between rich and poor and black and white, and that really became the motivation for the work that we're doing today. So again, it's really exciting to be here. I will mention one last thing, which isn't really related to democracy, but it's a big part of what the Collaboratory is working on right now. We are trying to put a go-kart track on top of the Transportation Center garage in the middle of downtown Dayton. It would be the only urban rooftop go-kart track in the United States. and we think that could be also an opportunity to create a new narrative here in Dayton alongside our well-being narrative. So more to come about that.
Thank you, Peter. So Daj'za, tell us your story.
I'm Dayton Demings. I am the Community Partnerships Coordinator for Omega CDC. And my first introduction to democracy, I didn't even know what democracy was. I was doing a free after-school program in one of our low-income neighborhoods, and the water was an issue. So yes, we were taking waters over there, but just giving them waters isn't necessarily fixing the issue, right? So got a couple families together, and they had a peaceful protest asking for things that they needed for their children, not even just for them, just for their families. And since then, democracy has been a major part of my life now that I know what it is. And that's every time we have a debate, every time we collaborate, all of those things are products of democracy. Democracy just means for the people. And anything that we do for the people is us actually exercising that. So yeah, that's how I got into democracy.
It's beautiful, and we're going to hear more from Daj'za in a minute. Thank you. My colleague, Jennifer McDermott, tell us your story.
Yep. My name's Jenny McDermott, and I coordinate the social work program at Sinclair, and I'm the faculty associate for experiential learning. And my introduction to democracy was really when I was in college. I was studying social work, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with that, but it was during the Barack Obama and John McCain campaign, and I was doing a lot of volunteer work with Vote Dayton. And so canvassing and knocking on doors and talking to people, registering voters and volunteering at polls, it was the hopeful, inspiring side of democracy. So when I went out into the field as a social worker, I was working with families who were engaged in the child welfare system. And what I realized really quickly is that most of them, if not all of them, were engaged in that system because they lacked their basic needs. They didn't have housing or support, health care, child care. They were working 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so engaging in that work and seeing maybe the more challenging side of democracy, I think is what encouraged me to, continue engaging in these processes and these systems. Democracy is about self-determination. It's about choice. And so many people are lacking both right now. So I think it's so important that we continue that hard work. So now that I'm at Sinclair, I get to work with students who are engaging in this work every day and are really so inspirational to me. And some of them are here, and I'm so proud of them because they are doing this right now, and they are doing really, they're fighting the good fight every day, and they're gonna be great social workers in these communities, so.
Thank you. So of the panelists, I had never met Fabrice Jewin, and so Fabrice, tell us your story as it relates to democracy.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Fabrice Jewin. I am the Regional Equity Initiative Manager for the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission. We engage in transportation infrastructure, economic development, environmental management, disaster recovery, and a host of things for the regional community. And my role is a fairly new one, and I'm tasked with asking the question, how do we avoid leaving people behind as we work to advance this region forward, which is Montgomery County, but also some of our surrounding counties as well. My family is one of Haitian immigrants, so policy has impacted our lives since stepping onto, America, footing into America. I was born in Haiti as well, and I have seen the ways in which that my folks have had to shed blood, sweat, and tears for a fraction of, this American dream, right? That they're still working on actively. Beyond that, within my role, I get to really engage with a lot of phenomenal people that start off as community contacts, but eventually become friends and family that have embraced me as somebody who was not originally from Dayton. And for me, a lot of my work relates to figuring out how to get those folks more involved or how to amplify their voices. This work is hard, this work is taxing, this work can really demoralize you depending on how you're going about it. And for me, democracy is an avenue to make sure that there is no 1, 2, or 3 individuals doing it by themselves, that the community can stand for itself and fight for itself and advocate for itself in a way that supports the institutions that are supposed to be working for it. So that is the relevance of democracy in my work and why it's such a privilege to be here today. So thank you for having me.
So thank you very much for your introducing of yourself, your story. What we're going to do next is move to a question about some examples. And Daj'za, I'm going to pick on you first. I'm not going back to Peter, but we'll get to him eventually. The question I have is, what examples have you seen of people coming together to make change in their communities? And then obviously, what can we learn from those examples? And Daj'za, I'll let you go first, and then we'll move this way and go back to Peter.
Perfect. A couple examples that I see. For one, with Omega CDC, we have our 4 work groups. And in those work groups are community members that we are having dialogue with, doing certain things so they know how to advocate for themselves in whatever spaces they're in for whatever it is that they need. So we have workforce development, health and wellness, education, and the other one is community engagement, my favorite. Thanks, Tracy. But in those work groups, we are getting them to a point where they can be the leaders and, lead us and show us that it works, that it's not just a one thing. They're surprised that anybody has ever even put them in a space for their voice to be heard. So not only are we making sure that their voices are heard, we're giving them professional development and things so, they have those extra skills and tools to be able to speak up for not only themselves, but their family and their community.
I appreciate that so much, yes. So often, and in fact, on my card that I wrote for Elizabeth's son, is that right? I said, my voice, my vote, for myself and my community. Too often, I think we approach the vote as if it's my personal choice, and if I don't get my way, then somehow I've failed, and that isn't necessarily the only consideration. I do need to think about what my community needs too, and that's what I hear you saying is you're helping people find their voice for their community. So thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, well, as Fabrice was talking, I was thinking about people coming together right now around the Haitian community, especially in Springfield, and I can't help but think if we were to rally around vulnerable communities a little bit more as a proactive way of operating in our society instead of a reactionary way, how much better could things really be? So I'm inspired by that and what I'm seeing, but I also think it's a lesson for us that if we were doing a little bit more proactively, and that's what we're doing right now. I'm really inspired by this. I'm looking around and thinking how many of us came to the table today to have these conversations and to be part of this, and this is hopeful to me. This is encouraging, and what a good lesson.
Can you tell me what's happening with your students in the classroom, examples that maybe you could share from that perspective?
Yeah, so our students, some of them are here today. They're doing projects, service learning projects in the community, working with agencies like some of yours to gather information and resources and get the word out about how important democracy is and being that active participant. We have a group of students leaving next week that we're taking to Chicago to learn about labor history and be part of, really understanding our foundational roots too as social workers and sociologists and, getting a feel for generations before us that have really done this activism. So I'm incredibly excited about that. They're really just an empowering group of students right now.
Thank you. Fabrice, how about for you? Examples that you see in the community?
For sure. I can bring up a lot, I would say. And I think I have at least 2 or 3 examples that I can kind of rattle off pretty quickly. I have to give some level of credit to our state governor. Matters that are happening in Springfield are personal to me, especially with my identity. But the response that the state has produced, which is a $2.5 million commitment to Springfield, is, I think, an example of how you combat misinformation and how you combat fear-mongering, right? as opposed to aligning with it, as opposed to just simply putting out a statement. You know, the recognition was that Springfield was in need of some assistance and really supporting their influx of Haitian immigrants. And that's the type of response that I'd appreciate seeing from leadership across the board. I'd have to also bring up my executive director, Brian Martin. The only reason that I'm here, I would say, in this role is, and there are a host of partners that contributed to the establishment of the program that I work for, but he raised his hand up to say that this was a program that he would host within the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, which really is a program that is focused on decentralizing power, right? It is not often that you come to your executive director and say, hey, there's this grant out there. We probably aren't the best to be the leads. There are folks who do the job better, but I'd like to write it and hand it over to another organization so they can do that great work. There's nothing in it for us beyond the regional benefit, but it's not often you have a leader like that who sees the value in decentralizing power, making sure we have strong partners across the board. And I have to bring my partner in crime into the mix in Destiny Brown, who I am collaborating on this effort. Destiny leads the Dayton Tenant Union, which has been going head to head with local officials and making sure that tenant rights are advocated for, and is creating something out of nothing, essentially. And I have to kind of give credit to the fact that she's been able to jump into this fellowship with me, and in some of the groundwork that she's doing on a grassroots level. So I could keep going, but there is no shortage of examples that inspire me to do the work that I do.
Thank you. So, Peter, back around to you. I'm trusting your microphone's going to work. What are those examples that you've seen of people coming together to make change in their communities, and what can we learn?
Okay, hey, good. First time the charm. I guess, I want to avoid being coming across as self-serving. I guess I'd like to talk about the very first project that I did, and it was called Sister Neighborhoods. This is 1992 in Chicago. It actually came out of two tragic shootings, one in 1988 in an elementary school in Winnetka, Illinois, where, unfortunately, a woman with mental health issues shot 6 people and killed a little boy named Nicky Corwin. And 4 years later, a shooting at Cabrini Green, which is a very notorious public housing community. A mom was walking her son to school, and he got caught in gang crossfire, and 6-year-old Dan Terrell Davis was unfortunately killed. Both of those stories ended up on Nightline, and I'd done some volunteer work in both communities. And when the second shooting took place, it was sort of my first epiphany. I was sort of struggling with what to do with my organization. So the name Sister Neighborhoods comes from the sister cities, kind of drawn from that. I'm sure most of you have heard of sister cities, but this notion that we could bring residents of Cabrini Green together with residents of Winnetka, and for those of you not familiar with Chicago, Winnetka is kind of like Oakwood, only a lot Oakwoodier. It's up on the North Shore. But out of this, and people would ask me, what do people in Cabrini Green and Winnetka have in common with each other? They just couldn't figure it out, and my answer was always the same. Other than their shared humanity, probably not much. But I met these two extraordinary women who, again, would seemingly have nothing in common with each other, but I got them together for a first conversation. I was like a fly on the wall listening to their stories. And at one point, Cynthia Gary from Winnetka started talking about how she and some of her lady friends were feeling misunderstood. And I'm thinking to myself, how can women in Winnetka be misunderstood? What's up with that? And she said, yeah, everybody thinks we're junior leaguers and we're CEO wives and we spend the day playing tennis and going shopping, getting massages. And she said, we want to tell another side of life in Winnetka, so we started a community newspaper, at which point Henrietta Thompson blurted out, we're not all gangbangers, welfare queens, and drug addicts. We need a community newspaper in Cabrini Green. And basically at that moment, Voice of Cabrini was born, which for 4 years was the only resident-run community newspaper in Chicago public housing. So our work is really all about the unexpected outcomes of unusual pairings, and that's the basis for this work. I think we can replicate sister neighborhoods here in this community, but it's really about bringing people together and allowing them to have the conversation that they want to have and figuring out what is it that they want to do, and then our role is to help them do the things that they want to do. But there's power in finding that commonality. and finding that shared humanity. I think you have to change the context of the conversation. Too often we try and pigeonhole people. You're a red or you're a blue, or you're this or you're that, and bring people together around their differences. Let's try and bring people around together around our commonality. That's the only way we're going to make this work moving forward.
Thank you. Thinking about your responses, and in my own head, I'm thinking about the connections even there. Peter talks about volunteering, and that exposed him to some folks in the Chicagoland area. Jenny talks about her students and the service that they're doing. Daj'za, I think in your own experience, you weren't sure what you were going to do with a life or career. So some of those experiences, volunteering or otherwise, right, connected you to the opportunities that came about. So as a teacher, I teach communication courses here at the college. Small group communication is one of those courses we teach, and we know that diverse teams make better decisions. This isn't rocket science, or even if it was, we'd be building better rockets, right? So we can see the benefits of using those diverse teams and having those experiences where we do encounter people that aren't exactly like us, and that's good. So next I want to move to thinking about some of the challenges. And Jenny, you knew that I'm coming to you next, right? So what challenges do you see in achieving a more inclusive democracy in our everyday lives? And obviously, how could we overcome those challenges? And if you don't have answers, that's okay, because we got the whole day to help solve some of those issues.
Yeah, I don't know that I do have answers. I think disinformation and the impact, I have little kids, so I see the impact of disinformation and negativity on social media and all of these platforms that I can't control. I can't control them in my own household, it seems like. So it's really challenging. They're going out into the world and they're coming back with, a narrative that isn't always correct, right? Like, we have to work at that. We have to work at, providing, I think, the next generation with the tools they need to unpack some of this, right? Because it's so much different now than it was even when I was a kid, and we talk about it all the time. So, I don't know that there's a solution to that. To me right now, that is the biggest challenge I'm facing, I think, is, trying to figure out how to help my kids and our future, I think, even when it comes to our students, navigate just the difficulties in, negativity. I guess that's the biggest challenge. Maybe, we've talked a lot about belonging, and that to me is a solution, right? Like, we have to foster a sense of belonging. And I think we've done that here today. It's a really good example and a good lesson, but that's the only solution, I think.
Can I ask you, are your students surprised by any of the things that their service reveals to them?
Well, I mean, we all come from different backgrounds, right? And a lot of us are walking through this world with a lot more privilege and maybe, are just getting to a point where we're recognizing that, right? So some of our students, when they go and experience something like that, I mean, it's the first time that they've seen, people who maybe don't know where their next meal is coming from, or people who may not have a place to sleep tonight. And so I think it's revealing a lot of our own experiences around privilege, maybe a lot of, the biases that we all walk through this world with. And I think it's a start, right, to start to unpack some of those things. Yeah.
Thank you. Social media is the main thing that you're identifying, or maybe screen time or technology and the way in which we're getting our information. Just a chance from the other panelists. Do you see connections there? Do you encounter that too? Not all at once.
Are you referring to anti-social media?
Well, you could use that term, yes. So, Jenny, I appreciate your perspective. And of course, my background in communication, I see it a lot. And it is a lot about the screen time. We know the research tells us that the more time people are spending in front of screens, the less positively they see their world. And the more time we spend outside, the more positively we're going to see that world. So there are things we can do, and yet we still have to live in this age. So challenging. Fabrice, how about for you? What are the challenges that you see in achieving a more inclusive democracy?
I think, I guess I could point to two things. I think we really need a paradigm shift when it comes to how we approach the serving community. And maybe my math isn't mathing, but from my perspective, I think that if we are able to really cater to the most vulnerable of us, then naturally everybody else is served, right? If we are pulling people out of homelessness and housing them, I would also assume that it caters to folks who might fall into homelessness or be at risk of falling into homelessness. If we are making sure that our food insecure areas have access to healthy food, then and from my perspective, that also caters to folks who might be falling into that as well, right? How do we recognize that in this proverbial hierarchy, that if we reach down the farthest, we're pulling up more people naturally, right? I could also, the second thing I would point out is the manner in which we structure decision-making and leadership. It never made a terrible amount of sense to me to have boards and almost entirely comprised of, very privileged individuals, right? Where the decision-making is coming from folks who already had something at the table, right? I think that at a bare minimum, and this is something that, we've experimented in, and again, we are not perfect whatsoever, I promise you that, but one thing that we've experienced with some of our grant opportunities is finding a way to divide that in half where, yes, we need subject matter experts, yes, we need folks who have a leadership capacity or at least have been in leadership, but at the same time, how do we balance that with the community members who live through it, right? How do we balance that with the folks who would be dealing with the consequence of whatever those decisions are, right? So, again, this is simple math to me. Sure, we need kind of half of those experts, but can we also facilitate not just in a tokenizing way, but community involvement where if it doesn't align with their needs or they do not agree, it does not move forward. And I really think that feels like a feasible thing that everybody may not be happy to hear about, but it feels like that's a step in the right direction of, again, decentralizing a lot of these institutions and making sure community is at the center and forefront of how we move forward and how we advance our communities.
I appreciate that, and I think you did too. So I'm thinking about those community members, and I agree with you that sometimes the boards are made up of privileged individuals who also sort of know the rules, right? And so often then those individuals who are not coming from privilege don't understand that there are some rules.
And if I could jump in too, I fully appreciate being in meetings where people are calling me out or have not so nice things to say about my agency, right? I fully appreciate people who can show up holistically and not have to worry about any consequences or an employee evaluation. So yeah, 110%. As you mentioned, a diverse group produces more holistic solutions. And again, we also have to be a little bit more humble, right? It is, if it's not hard and you're not working hard, then you may not be doing enough. Or if there aren't accountability systems that are pushing you to do better and be better, there may need to be some level of adjustment, so yeah.
I appreciate that so much. So as those individuals then are brought to a board, we can't just say, okay, now you got your spot at the table, but we probably need to do some things to help them understand how do we successfully then engage in that deliberative decision-making or contributing and things like that. I saw Carolyn Rice here, I'm calling you out a little bit, thinking about what do we do to help those community members that we want to invite to those conversations to understand how to help make it work well for them. Does that make sense? Thank you. So helpful, and I appreciate that. I'm going back to Peter. What challenges do you see in achieving a more inclusive democracy in our everyday lives, and how can we overcome them?
I would say ignorance, hate, imprecise language, and false capitalism.
Go on.
Ignorance, hate, imprecise language, and false capitalism.
I want you to elaborate. You knew I did.
Well, first of all, we don't have capitalism here. So there's some imprecise language, privatizing the profits and socializing the losses and bailing out the auto industry and the banks, while those might be good for society, aren't capitalism. I mean, good for you if your GM stock went from $100 to $200. That's a smart investment. But if it goes to zero, you know, and so we have a narrative here, and a historical narrative that really isn't true. This notion of if you work hard and play by the rules, you're going to get ahead. That's the American dream. Well, you're not getting ahead for a reason. I mean, exploitation has been with us since this country was founded. Slavery is really about economics and greed, and all exploitation really comes back down to economics at the end of the day. And so, you know, it is about creating a new model. If I can quote my non-Buckminster Fuller quote for my second favorite Gish sister. If you want to change something rather than fighting the existing reality, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So this is all about well-beingism. I mean, we can praise capitalism, which we don't have all day long, but at the heart of the word capitalism is capital. It's saying capital comes first. This is about capital. Well, what if we had well-beingism? What if our wealth was really judged in how much well-being we had going on here? So this is about new language. It's about a new narrative. It's about radical mutuality. This is about a very different approach to how we build community.
Yes, thank you. But I want to follow up with that. So, all right, I love it. How do we get there?
Exactly what we're doing right here. It's about the kind of conversations. I mean, these conversations happen at the collaboratory every day, and they're happening all over the community. It's not the usual suspects that are going to make change here. It's not the institutions that are going to make change. There was a reason, I've got a background in advertising, there's a reason that Prudential said own a piece of the rock, because the rock isn't going anywhere. But the rock isn't going anywhere. And so we can't look to our institutions. We have to look to the community to drive the change. You know, be the change you want to see. You know, but it's really about doing the work. One of my mentors back in Illinois used to say, "Too many of us are residents and not citizens." You know, and it's about owning our future. And that's why we're really here today. This is about a different movement. I mean, yeah, democracy is wonderful, but if you aren't experiencing well-being, you can't even participate in democracy. If you're working 2 jobs and just running to get home to pick up your kids, we struggle with this. I mean, there's privilege for all of us sitting up here that we can take a Friday off. You know, even a lot of times the notion of self-care, we do self-care. Well, I'm taking Friday off as a spa day. Well, that's great. You got a job, you can take Friday off, and you got a couple $100 to do spa day. Yes, you can do self-care, and you can go walk in the woods for a little bit. It doesn't necessarily cost anything. But, you know, for so many folks, and as Fabrice said, those who are the most vulnerable, that's where we need to start. They need to be experiencing well-being. We need to build a network of well-being ambassadors and a support system, because that's what people need. Your community is your network of support and inspiration, and a lot of people don't have that, and they're just trying to get by to the next day. And we can't build a thriving region until everybody is realizing their potential. Our region will not be as thriving as it can be, and so that's what we need to be striving for. And again, I'm sorry to be beating the well-being drum, but you can't realize your potential unless you're experiencing well-being.
I can't miss the opportunity to acknowledge that that's why St. Clair is here. That's what we do, right? We are here to ensure that everybody can fulfill that perfect potential, that ultimate potential. So thank you. Daj'za, I'm really glad that you get to be the last voice on this question. What challenges do you see in achieving that more inclusive democracy in our everyday lives? How do we overcome those challenges?
One of the challenges that I would say is misinformation. It's like playing telephone, how you just start one in and by the end there's nothing that you said in the beginning. So misinformation, the lack of underrepresented voices, and most importantly, like getting our youth involved. I'm really happy to see Meadowdale. I'm a Meadowdale Lion. Hello. But, you know, it's great that they are able to come out to even be a part of something like this. You know what I mean? So they get a positive experience and they get the information, you know, that they're able to take back and give to someone else. That's what it's about. When it comes to our children and our families, we're not just saying, hey, this is what you guys do. See ya. No, we're there. I like what Tracy has said. I don't even know if you remember that you said this, but she was saying, like, say we're going to a picnic and we get the table and we put the sheet on the table and we put a centerpiece and then we back off. I thought that was a great analogy, and that's the type of things that it takes for it to work.
Thank you. So my next question relates to sort of how do we get there in a way. And let's see, I started with Jenny last time, so Fabrice, I'm going to start with you. The question is, what role does community discussion or engagement play? And I think we've talked about it a bit already. What role does that community discussion or engagement play in fostering democracy, and how can we use conversations around those kitchen tables or in other public spaces to push for change?
So I'd say a conversation, at least from my experience, is only productive when it's intentional, right? When you have the appropriate individuals in the room. And one thing I'll relay back to, I think, what both Peter and Daj'za had expressed is you also still need institutions present as well in a way that is engaged in the conversation, yes, but that takes a step back to recognize that your specific role ideally should be to elevate the people and the voices and what they're saying, right? To make sure that you are not standing in front of the people, and if anything, you might even need to stand behind them to make sure that when they falter, you know, they have that support to lean on, or at least that entity and investment to push them forward. So I think conversations can be valuable as long as they are leading to some level of movement and action, right? You know, we talk a lot. We talk a very, very good amount, and I promise you that there is, you know, that family down the block or that household on the other side of town, they don't care about what we're saying right now. They care about what we're gonna do from that conversation. So conversation is necessary at times, but if it stops there, if it stops at the meeting minutes, if it doesn't lead to any change, or if we're saying the same things over and over again, then we are just talking to ourselves in many ways. So intentional conversation that is action-oriented, and also where we can have institutions present to not just take over the conversation, but to invest in what they're hearing and what's being expressed from that dialogue.
I appreciate that. So often I think decisions seek input, but then fail to communicate how the input was used in order to inform and then help make the decision. And so all we see is an outcome, but fail to recognize all the pieces that went into that outcome. And I think that misses an opportunity. So to the extent that there are leaders who can help to better communicate all the steps that were taken in making informed decisions and the way in which the many voices were included, I think can be really helpful. Peter, coming around to you, so what role does community discussion or engagement play? You know the drill.
I mean, I think that's a question that answers itself. I mean, it is, the community discussion is the democracy. The one thing I think I would just add to that is we probably need to be doing a lot more asset-based community development work in Dayton. And again, for a lot of those folks that are struggling, no one's necessarily even talking to them about what their gifts and talents are, and trying to get an understanding of and helping them see their own value in the community. And so that's an approach that I think we need to be doing more of here. I know that's the base of a lot of Amaha's work, but we're doing some work in the East End community and trying to figure out how do we capture those gifts and talents, but also how do we make sure those people are really a part of the process. But yeah, the kitchen table conversations, that is the work. I think sometimes the hard part is, who do you take it to? Okay, who's the right place to go to? I think, again, part of having a well-being index is we can use it to hold our leaders and ourselves accountable. We don't really have a great metric for holding ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of it's broken down by a silo. It's a housing metric, or it's an economics metric, or a transportation metric. But, are we making the right policy decisions? Are we allocating our resources in the place to close the gap so we can actually see movement in well-being? So it's an opportunity to get us aligned. But ultimately, it's these folks in the room. But I think that's one of the other challenges to your previous question. Who do you take it to? Who's supposed to make sure it's getting implemented? Is it the city commission? Is it the elected officials? Because we vote, and then a lot of times we'll show up again 2 or 4 years from now and wonder why things haven't gotten better. And it's like, well, you have to stick in the game.
Appreciate that. I want to ask you, if you could, to talk more about that asset-based approach, and if you can identify either groups or maybe it's your own organization who could help individuals to try to advance that. I'm not sure everybody understands what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, asset-based community development it's really based on identifying the gifts and talents that already exist in a community and kind of pull that out. There's a gentleman, actually, who I met through the Kettering Foundation about 10 years ago, named Diamond Hargis, who's in Indianapolis, who's written, along with his collaborator, Mike Mather, who's United Methodist, written a book called Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, which is just an incredible story of their work together, and really describes how, and the first chapter is up in South Bend, where they were giving out food in a food bank, and they decided that rather than just asking how many people are in their family, and here's 2 bags of food, they asked the first person they asked, a woman, she know how to cook, and so the long story short is they helped her set up with a catering business, but if they never asked her what she was good at, they would have never known that she had these gifts. And there's there's these stories in this community today that we need to lift those folks up, find out what their gifts are, find out what brings them joy, and really help support them in getting more engaged. And I think anybody can learn the work. The Asset-Based Community Development Institutes at DePaul University. I mean, there's lots of things out there, but it goes from a needs approach to a gifts approach. Not that you don't want to give somebody a bus pass if they need a bus pass, but too often we ignore those gifts that are all around us in our community. And so part of it is opening your eyes to seeing, asking people what brings them joy. I mean, a lot of times we're working with folks and around well-being, and people say, well, no one's ever asked me that before. No one's ever bothered to ask me. Nobody's ever cared. Where do I want to be? They're just trying to fix what my past was rather than give me an opportunity to express what I want my future to look like. So it's a whole change in mindset that we're really talking about here.
Yeah, thank you. So that change from a needs approach to an asset, or what are the strengths, what are the gifts approach, and I love the way you phrased that, so thank you. Daj'za.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Sure, I'm happy to. So what role does community discussion or engagement play in fostering our democracy, and how can we use those conversations around the kitchen table or maybe public places to push for change?
It starts with us going to the people and having conversations that they understand. There's some places where I can't go and say, hey, what policy do you think is wrong, right? So just really I don't want to say influencing, but teaching people, this is the right way to do something. How you feel about it, that's up to you, you know what I mean? But just giving them the space and the opportunity to learn, like he said, their gifts and talents. A lot of people don't even know what their gifts and talents are, let alone me only sitting with you for an hour every other Tuesday. Like, I can't necessarily point that either, right? But just paying attention to the things that you do outside of those spaces, and, just being conscious and mindful, that you can create change. And that's something that, at Omega CDC, we really, really instill that into our scholars and families to let them know that, hey, you have power, right? You have power too. So let's see what this looks like while we're talking about this issue, or we're worried about this at school. Just making sure that people understand the simplest things.
Thank you. I think about the differences in age, and that how in my own lifetime, I had a time in my life where I had lots of energy, but I didn't know what to do. And now I have less energy, but I know how to get it done. And I think sometimes we have to think about, what is my gift at my place in my life now, different than what it might have been at another time in another place in my life. The Mentoring Collaborative, I think, is here around the corner. And I think about how maybe it's time for me to think about, how do I help others get their voice, right? Because I can help them find the right person to talk to. And so through a mentoring or some other relationship, maybe there's new ways that I can engage that I hadn't thought about before. And you've really brought that to my mind. So thank you. Jenny, I can repeat. How does our community discussion or engagement play in what role does it play in fostering democracy? How can we use conversations around the kitchen table or in our public spaces to push for change?
Well, I think I agree with everybody on the panel that it is democracy. I mean, those conversations, that is democracy, that's the practice. So one of the core tenets of social work is that we lead with the strengths, right? The assets. So it speaks to what Peter's talking about. And what we don't want to do is parachute in and tell a person, a family, or a community what it is they need. That we have to be doing the listening. And so, I think many of us at different points in time, myself included, have been guilty of that parachuting function, right? So, I think that leading with the strengths and not with the problem is where we're going to get the furthest in our communities, and really listening to the people who are impacted.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm looking at Elizabeth next. We've kind of worked through our portion that we planned, and I'm hoping that either you can give me new direction, like maybe invite some comments from the community.
We weren't going to do questions, but it seems like we can.
We probably have a few minutes, and then we'd still have time for a comfort break.
Yeah, so maybe let's try 10 minutes of questions, and I can do the mic.
If you wouldn't mind doing the mic. If you have either an additional idea, because we've been sharing ideas, or if you had a question for one of the panelists, raise your hand. Elizabeth will find you, and I see one right in the back. Thank you.
Hi. I don't really have a question, but this came to my mind when Daj'za was speaking, that it's hard to focus on your gifts and talents when you're trying to survive. Mm-hmm. You can bring that to the people and bring out their gifts and talents, but they don't even think about that. They don't know what they are, because that's not where their focus is day to day, getting the next meal or where you're going to sleep, So you've got to start lower, to bring them up, so.
I can turn that into a question, because I think that's such a good point, is what do we say to folks when, we're like, la la, democracy, vote, and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to get my kids to school, get to work, get food on the table, don't talk to me about going to some meeting or, voting. Like, I talked to someone and they said, yeah, that's about rich people getting richer and poor people getting poorer. I don't want anything to do with that. What do we say to folks like that? Because it's true, it's hard for those of us even who have stable incomes to engage and to find time to raise kids and go to meetings and vote. If you're just barely hanging on, why would someone want to do that?
So normally they give us like a softball question first. I mean, anybody want to take that on? Because I don't.
Yeah, I would too. One thing that I would say, I'm from the west side of Dayton, so the trust is there, and trust is what it's going to take for those conversations. Yes, a lot of people have a lot of stuff going on, but our lives are ran by politics, unfortunately. If you don't do politics, politics will do you, my aunt said. So just really making sure that we have those conversations with people that feel like they don't have a chance, or they don't have power, or they don't have a voice, so they know that they do.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. A couple things come to mind. Some of this is how you serve it up, but I guess I would also respectfully disagree a little bit. We were meeting with a youth organization here in town. I will not name who they were, and basically they said to us, these kids who come here don't have any dreams. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. And so it is how you approach people. It's not necessarily, it's like we do some work with formerly incarcerated folks, and our program isn't for folks the day they get out of, first day they're showing up. So I think folks do have dreams. They do have, and some of the work we're doing with East End, people do know where they want to get to. And you give them an opportunity to talk about where they want to get to and know you're going to be there to support them. So it's not like the first thing I'm going to ask, Daj'za, what are your gifts? If we haven't even, we got to build the trust and do all those other things. But I got to know Daj'za has gifts, even though you might be somebody who's struggling in other ways. And so it is a way to get people to think that there is hope and there is opportunity, not to dismiss the struggles that they're dealing with at the same time. But I think you got to believe that folks, in many ways, do know, even if they've been they're struggling with addiction or domestic violence or any of these things, that there is light at the end of the tunnel if you give them an opportunity to articulate where it is that they want to get to.
And I would just jump in. Please applaud.
Yay!
I would just jump in and just, number one, express that is an extremely valid perspective, that one that, we talk about a lot in terms of recognizing that folks have some really immediate needs. So we can have phenomenal 5 or 10 year plans, but people need to be catered to today. And in terms of, some tangible things that could be incorporated, and this is not, as you mentioned, rocket science, right? How accessible are we making the conversation? How accessible are we making the space? How inclusive are we being in the way we reach out to community? How many barriers are we breaking down for them to be involved, whether it's when the meeting's scheduled, where it's scheduled, or what they leave with beyond just the emotional burden and lift that they have to provide to talk about their experience. And number two, I would also have to say that at least something that I try to implement is serving first before I ask anything of community. When I go and tap in with D. Wooding and Westwood, I know I might have to dig a little bit. I might have to pull some weeds out from some lot that has been littered. I'm gonna have to find some way to integrate myself into their struggle before I can ask anything of them. So those feel like some very tangible steps in terms of recognizing we have to put our neck out there for community first prior to inviting them to take up any of their time and their experience and expecting anything from them.
Thank you, Fabrice. You have another question?
We do, unless I didn't want to cut Jenny off if Jenny wanted to say something.
No, that's okay. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, you're good.
Good.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but a comment. Peter, Miss Mary Tyler, Tony, and Miss Shelley English, they together some years ago put together the Dayton United. It's now what we call the Dayton United for Human Rights. It's a coalition going on that is working to help people recognize the dignity that they have. I want to ask everybody here, please support Dayton United for Human Rights. It's not going to be limited to Dayton, but we need it to start as a grassroots in Dayton. When you recognize your dignity and that you have value, maybe then you can start fighting and standing for some of these things, other rights that it doesn't take money to have to fight for.
Thank you.
I just want to add, that's an example of a citizen taking action.
Exactly. Yeah, grassroots citizen taking action, yes. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. I'm seeing lots of hands. Yeah, and I'm hearing over here, too. We're going to just go over here. And I see there's lots of questions, and so we're going to take this one and one more. Then I'm going to send you off to your workshops and such, but know that there's other time for conversation.
For sure.
Bishop Cox.
I'm not a popular person in this community, but people know who I am. I'm Bishop Richard Cox, and I'm the president of the Clergy Community Coalition. I've not heard anybody mention health care. And health care is inadequate for African Americans across this country, and in particular in Dayton, Ohio. How do you get people on the west side of Dayton who have been neglected by our city fathers, and we've been down there time and time and again, we've elected them, voted them in office, and they care nothing about the west side of Dayton. And then they wonder why there's so much violence on the west side. Take a look at the west side and find out where they're pumping money at. Is that democracy or what? Healthcare in this community is inadequate. Now, I don't have to go into why it's inadequate, because you already know why it's inadequate. And that's something that the Clergy Community Coalition is doing something about. But I wanted to raise that question because it's a very serious question in the African American community. We have no health care services in terms of emergency services. Babies cannot be born on the west side of Dayton, Ohio. It's a problem, and that's something we need to address.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
you.
One more question. Where are you going to go?
Were there any responses to that?
Oh, thank you.
So my background is in public health, and in terms of how I at least attempt to define equity, it is at a bare minimum, I don't think everybody needs to live in a mansion or drive a luxury car or go to an Ivy League school, but I think we should be able to promise our community members the most optimal version of health available to them. Now, those are just words that I'm saying to you, right? One of the things that at least I had wished had occurred across the nation, but especially locally, is prior to some of these declarations of racism as a public health crisis, we had already had plans for implementation. I think I recently read an article that expressed that very few communities have made any progress on those declarations, and it's been about 4 years now. I would also say from a health perspective, we are still discussing health in a very individualistic way, right? When we have, as you mentioned, mothers who are experiencing negative birth outcomes, when we have children who don't know what's going to be on the table or the dinner table tomorrow, we see that as that's the issue for that person, that household, and that family, as opposed to the fact that that is a community failure. That is a community-wide failure. You know, I spent some time in Canada, and I can tell you universal health care is phenomenal. And I know I don't have the means to make that change, but, and again, these are just words that I'm expressing while people need help today, but at a bare minimum, I think we do need to start thinking about health as a community perspective. So whatever is happening, if we're talking about West Dayton, that is a failure on the entire region. And I would also say, just to throw some statistics in there that should be alarming to folks, is within MVRPC, we have the Plan for Health initiative, which is looking at making connections between public health and regional planning, or planning in general. And one of the statistics that were revealed from that, that analysis showed that locally across the region, you are at more risk of negative health outcomes as a Black and African American person in the Miami Valley than somebody who is experiencing literal poverty. For some reason, that racial identity brings about more negative health outcomes than the state of being in poverty. And that is something that should not make sense to any of us and should be a concern. And that's stats that I can send you a link and you could look up today. So legitimizing what you're saying and just kind of reiterating that it needs to be a priority. And I appreciate you bringing that up and speaking in this room of some very heavy hitters about it too.
Thank you, Fabrice.
Thank you. I think we're going to have our last question over here, and then I'm going to give you brief directions about next steps, and then we'll go.
Hello. I just have a suggestion, and as an educator, I would want to see, so I want to say thank you for all the young people as well as their educators who brought them here, but maybe something going forward in your plan could be like a summit for the seniors, those who are voting age at Dayton Public Schools, so they could also be involved to understand more about democracy, why their vote, why their activity and active involvement is really critical to our city. So that's just a suggestion. And so that's it. And maybe even freshman classes or people who are going to be freshmen in our local universities from Central, Wilberforce, of course, Sinclair, UD, because I think people kind of make an assumption, oh, okay, they have all this information in front of them and they may not have an opportunity to ask questions, learn more, how can they be involved? And I mean as a face-to-face interaction, because it's one thing, even though we live digitally, but it's another to have a presence like this. So that's just a suggestion.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we give our panel and our moderator a round of applause?